Oh, really? Yeah, well, that's
Name and signature and print. What's that? What's your last name?
Janson, Janson.
Alright, you gotta explain the whole cutting the back off again. For my mandolin documentary here.
Well, the whole theory behind the thing was that over the years they lost the original specifications that Lloyd Lohr, the most famous mandolin sound technician there ever was, who created this type of mandolin, they lost the specifications over the years. They weren't passed down, even within the Gibson factory. So once an early mandolin got damaged, they would take the specifications off of it and try to emulate on a more modern instrument, being this in 1963. So they would take, the only way to properly do this and not lose all the patina, and you could feel it if you feel it here, but they took a fine saw and they cut the entire back of the mandolin off very carefully so that it didn't damage anything. And then they took and regraduated, which means they took chisels and recarved the whole inside of the top of the mandolin, the soundboard. And so they would carve it to the original specifications. And so all these have different frequencies. All these different points on the soundboard have different frequencies. And so he would take time and recarve it, and then he'd do the same thing to the back. He'd recarve the back to the right specifications and frequencies. Then he glued the instrument back together. And on this one, my understanding is they replaced the tuners, so these are more modern tuners than came with the mandolin originally. But they work very well. They're really good. And
did they look different? The older ones?
Yeah, the older ones. Originally, this thing would have.
They weren't gold, I guess.
Well, this had gold hardware originally, but yeah, they'd be gold. But they were probably just this is '60s instrument. You know, they kind of got cheap with the hardware. So these would be a higher end, tuning machine.
So these are higher end than the originals.
Than the originals.
Yeah, and then you were saying that.
And then this is back then. Originally, this peg head was not bound. So if you see the binding that goes around the edges of the peg head, it wasn't originally bound. It was just a flat ebony finish. And the higher end models always had a bound peg head. So what this luthier did, this Randy Wood guy, was he bound the peg head, and then he did an antiquing process to make it look like it's the same yellow orange color. I mean, when this mandolin was brand new, all of this binding would have been bright white.
And that's just the varnish aging over time.
Yeah, the varnish is just aged over time. And if you look at it, I mean, usually there's buckle rash back here and all sorts of stuff. You'll see there's nothing at all. The only thing I see is there's some fine finish cracks right here in the F scroll, and I mean that absolutely does nothing at all to affect the playability of the instrument. The neck's a flat fretboard, but it's really, really straight, nice. It's got the truss rod in it up here, so if you want to flatten it out even more, you've got a truss rod adjustment to do that. It's got the original bound pick guard, which is really in good condition. You can see that thing is just fantastic, The original hardware mounting it, which is really, really nice to have. And it's got the original Gibson tailpiece. The gold finish is worn off from playing, people just playing it over the years, but and it's probably an Engelmann spruce top, I'm sure. That's probably what 90% of these Gibson mandolins. Some of the early ones would have an Adirondack spruce top on the right side and a different type of spruce on the left side, the Engelmann and the Adirondack. But this is probably all Engelmann spruce, I would assume. It looks like it. And then the back, it's just a non-flame, probably maple back and a maple neck. So just a solid little player. This thing's a little monster. It's got a great pop to it. I don't know what size strings they put on. They feel like medium gauge strings. Probably Diodarios or something like that, which are great. But yeah, man, the thing's in rocking condition for being older than me.
Yeah, for 50 years old, and I'd have to say the Randy Wood guy did a really nice job of kind of making it all seem very original in his hot rodding of the instrument, yeah?
Well, the cool thing about doing this, and it's very popular now, but back when this was done, this was probably done 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Back when this was done, he was the only guy doing it. And the deal is that, you know, today that's a very common thing. People can't afford a $250,000 mandolin. And so you want that original sound, and the only way to get it is to take an old instrument, because the wood's old,
Yeah.
and it's aged, and it's played in, and kind of retune it. And that's just scraping and cutting away wood to make it work. And this is a really bitchin' instrument. You know, I talked to this guy about the two instruments that he had. He had this one, and he had a 50. And I said, what do you think? He goes, well, the 50, you know, that's the problem is, even from the 50s to the 60s, these things just didn't have the sound. They didn't have that rockin', poppin', deep sound. So, like, we both agreed this would just be the most, you know, most projection in an instrument, you know, so, and it's got just super playable. I mean, you can play it anywhere on the, feel a little sharp there, but. So it's really playable. The action